Welcome to The Green Room, a talk show by INFLUX Network for Dance, Theatre and Performance in collaboration with FS1 TV. I am Nayana Keshava Bhat, and I will be your host for this segment along with Ursula Schwarz and Tomaz Simatovic. INFLUX, I have to read this, is a Salzburg-based open network of artists collaborating through their respective mediums in order to create artistic works across disciplines. We believe in sustainable art, and we know that in order to achieve sustainability, we need the engagement of the community. The Green Room is a platform for artists in Salzburg to make their works visible to their potential audience. Through this talk show format, our attempt is to reveal artistic processes, thereby creating a link between the artist who created it and how they created it, and what you see on stage. The Green Room is not an interview, but a conversation. This is where things happen before the show begins. Now to this, I would like to introduce you to two of my fellow artists, Ursula Schwarz, clown performer and co-founder of the Salzburger clown group, Clownfabrik, and Tomaz Simatovic, a Slovenian choreographer and performer based in Salzburg over several years. And I'm Nayana Keshava Bhat. I'm a performer, dancer, and choreographer, and co-founder of INFLUX. In today's talk, we will focus on our project Mehr, eine, clownesk, groteske, Parabel, with 3 of the 5 artists that are involved in the process. So, Mehr is a collaborative work between INFLUX and Clownfabrik, through which we examine the subconscious motivations behind one of the disasters of our time. We examine the emotional landscape of greed through clownesk and grotesque points of view in the pretext of Rana Plaza building collapse, factory collapse in Bangladesh in 2013. Ursula is one of the lead performers of this project as a clown as well as a buffon. So how is it for you to combine your experience as a clown in improvisation and bring it to theater, as well as work with buffoonery in the same piece?
I think it's really the improvisation is really the core of clowning, and it's a very important part. Mm-hmm. So clowns are very in the moment, and they are very much in their emotion. Mm-hmm. So we basically developed this piece out of improvisation. Mm-hmm. And then we set the scenes and we decided what's working and what's not. And as you already mentioned it, basically, it's really a thing of not reproducing what we have said, but it's really every time I go there in as a clown with an empty mind, and like if I would experience it the first time. Mm-hmm. At least that's what we are trying to do. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes it's hard. Yeah. So it's really when you're just improvising in the moment, yeah, it's easier because you're actually experiencing it the first time. And when it's a set piece, it's more work to arrive there, but that's basically what we try to do, to mm-hmm. really clear our mind and really go into the moment, into the feeling. And therefore, of course, it's every time there is some improvisation in there, it has mm-hmm. to be. Mm-hmm. And the buffoonery, maybe I have to give some context what it is. It's somewhere in the clown universe. The clowns are very naive, and the buffons have a very political, incorrect, very direct humor.
The anti-clowns.
So they are some sort of anti-clowns. And in the context of this piece, it made total sense that we start in this naive way of just wanting something. And then wanting more and more and more. And in the end, we ended up really in this very grotesque greed, which has a very very terrible face. So it's really, it made a lot of sense to not stick with the clown, but really go in this very, it's really a terrible expression, visible, physical visible expression of this greed, I would say. It's the
imperfection? No, that's not the word.
Personification.
Personification.
Personification of the greed in physical visibility, I would say. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Also, I would like to know eventually, how is it for you to bring both of them in the piece? But before that, I'd like to come to Tomaz, also bring him in. How is Tomaz part of this project? Because originally it was a team of the four of us, me, Ursula, Julia Lechner on musical accompaniment as well as voice and text, and Orthwin Probst, who is also a clown and a buffoon in this project. I would like to ask you from that point of view, to begin with, as the outside party to this constellation at first, and now also inside as a dramaturg and as the rehearsal director, assistant, and so on. How is it?
Thank you first for the invitation. It's very interesting also to reflect about my own research through the perspective of your piece and the other way around. So as you mentioned, the Performing Solidarity Project, it's an ongoing performance research project that I'm involved with, that I initiated, and it's a kind of performance study or performance research through practice and theory. And I'm specifically observing since 2018, observing at the act of performing solidarity, like the performance of solidarity in the context of our real life, in our real world. And I'm specifically looking into situations of rescue interventions or any kind of civilian interventions in acts of rescue, solidarity, humanitarian work, and so on. So basically, how do people intervene into life-threatening situations? And I'm looking for performative translations of that through the perspective of performance. And as you have mentioned already before, the architectural incident of Rana Plaza was the beginning standpoint for this research, where I got fascinated into the heroic rescue of the civilians in this rescue operation. So I began to study different case studies around this notion. And I also created a couple of works, as you have already mentioned, on the basis of figuring out this different formats of how to involve audience, therefore public or civilians, in the performance, which does not only reflect the rescue operation, but also tries to figure out how will the audience involve themselves. So how do they participate on the basis on their own impulses that they feel during the performance. And this led me then into a really like year after year into an extensive research on the question of what is it that mobilizes people to intervene, to participate, to interact in real life, and that also translated then into a context of art, like a performance. So when you invited me to work with you guys on this Rana Plaza case, I began to observe, or I began interested in how does a clownesk perspective mobilize participation. That is my question. And I was, as an assistant, as a dramaturg, also observing how am I being involved, how am I being pulled into the story, and what kind of potential participatory formats could develop, where where the audience is part of it, not just as a spectator, but also as an active participant.
This brings me to the point that originally this piece, Mehr, was planned to be an interactive audience participating format of a performance, because I was also inspired and also I received several impulses from the work that we did, which was also focusing a lot on our audience participation. And I wanted to bring that topic, but address it from a clownesk point of view, so that there can be a possibility of seeing how grave that issue and that setup is from a clownesk point of view. This contrapoint, this contrast is what allows the gravity of the situation to come forth, was my instinct at the time. And it was supposed to be a participatory format, which eventually it was not, because we started working on this piece in the beginning of 2020, which is also when COVID came, and there were several restrictions where audience participation became increasingly impossible. So the piece developed from the circumstances that it was placed in, it developed being what it is now, where it still has room for audience to participate and interact. Eventually, maybe that would be the side tangents that we will arrive at, but as of now, the audience is still a spectator. And that was also the reason why clowns came into play, because clowns have direct contact. The clowns need direct contact with the audience in order to be a clown. And this is also what somehow this was supposed to be also the starting point of this audience interaction and participation in the development of the piece performance itself, which is now something else. But this direct interaction still stands good. And that really also, this was a thought that went in there.
Yeah, my question would be a follow-up to what you began starting to ask Ursula before. You mentioned something which is a relationship between being naive, like a naivete, or a representation of a naivete, versus a buffoonery, which is the exaggeration of, you talked about greed and of human greed, human society, and so on. So how does the perspective of the clown actually work? Like, if you put, like, in a normal clownesk situation, what is it that the clown does? How does the clown intervene into this reality that we live? What does the clown do? What would be the clown's perspective?
So the shortest answer is maybe the clown is like a child. So it's the perspective of a child on the world, and it's really very, I know,
unfiltered.
Unfiltered, unvoreingenommen is the true word.
Yeah, it's unassuming also.
Yes, so it's really, I'm just looking at the things as they are. I don't judge them, and I just take them as they are. And then as a clown performer, it's really, I'm seeing things, and then I see which emotion comes up and which impulse do I want to take. And that basically are really very often the basic needs of humankind, or it's not really like in the norm of what society wants from you. That's also because greed is nothing we would say is a good thing, you know, but we all know it. We all know this feeling of greed at some point, and maybe it's held down by society. But to want something, or also to be jealous about someone, or these are all feelings we know, basically. And the clown doesn't say it's not okay to have them. He just has them.
Yeah.
And just acts them out. And of course, there are also, but the clown also wants to be good. He wants to be loved. That's the thing of the clown. And the buffoon, he doesn't want to be loved. He really
doesn't care for that.
No, he doesn't care at all for that. And so it gives, anyway, much more freedom to really put it on the plate. The bouffon is really like a slap in your face.
Yeah,
actually.
a bouffon also, just like adding to this point, that a bouffon is also a mockery, right? It's a social
Yes.
mockery.
Yes.
The figure of a bouffon
Yes.
is actually mocking the society. It's almost kind of inhuman, transhuman. It's
Yeah.
not on a human level, right?
Yeah.
At least from the understanding that I have of this.
Yeah.
So in a way, it really offers the other point of view.
What I would be interested in relation to what you said, or what's your role in this project now as an outside eye somehow, and you're a dancer, and also in, for example, our Salzburg improvisation evenings, dancers and clowns come together in a improvisational research. And what I observed as an artist is that it's very interesting when they come together, because clowns are so direct. They're in the moment, they're in their emotion. And dancers, I sometimes have the feeling they are in their body. But tell me if I'm wrong, it's not so much about emotion. Or maybe it's the other way around, from the body there comes the emotion. And I would really be interested, how do you see it as a choreographer, as a dancer, this clownesk point of view, also in relation to suddenly the floor was not there, which was a performative dance piece, I would say, a performance piece. A performance.
Yeah.
It was a performance.
It doesn't mean if I'm a choreographer or a dancer that I will always create dances.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It was a performance. But how would you describe our approach, or what does the clown do for you with this topic? How would you how did you perceive that?
Well, from my perspective, when I entered the project, I didn't look at it from the perspective of dance, because there is no dance. There is no need to dance there, because the piece is clearly, for me, a performance in a theatrical context. So I'm looking at it through the perspective of figuration, through the perspective of figure, through the perspective of movement. How is movement involved? How does a choreographed movement bring forth or help bringing forth what the theater wants to suggest, communicate? And what was for me also very important to work with was how am I as an audience empathizing with the work, with what is being delivered, with what is being created, whether through emotion or whether through kinesthetic empathy, if we talk about movement. And as I said before, the research part of me was interested in how does this mobilize my participation. Does it involve me? In what way does it involve? Does it stimulate me to engage? Does it? So when we talk about movement, for me, what was interesting is like how does it mobilize movement also in the audience?
In a somatic sense,
yeah,
right?
in a somatic sense, in a performative action. Therefore, I, as a spectator, am allowed to do something, and how is the performance mobilizing that? In what way? How is this dramaturgically being? How is the work dramaturgically being distributed between the performers and the spectators? Of course, we didn't go there because of all the COVID end-time measures.
But does it move somehow? Or what is your? Would you say? Is there a mobilization in the audience, or can you imagine? Because they never did it in front of audience so far.
Well, I have been observing it as a collaborator, so I've also seen the work in its full run, and I have also reflected with you many times that it moves me a lot from the perspective of imagery and social critique. So I'm observing basically what not to do. So in terms of action, what is it that the piece suggests me to perform? What is it that I would do in real life in respect to this work? It's, I would say, I'm learning what not to do. So it's the anti-action. It's the it has some kind of almost like an educational perspective, where through this social critique, I withdraw from acting in that way. So the clown becomes for me a representation of a naivety when we act in an irrational way, when we only follow our desires and impulses without knowing what does it,
what consequences
what
come out of it.
consequences, yeah.
Interestingly, for me, the motivation was to keep it as non-judgmental as possible
Yeah.
in terms of the theme, but represent it with for the audience to decide for themselves the facts, because we really, for me also, this was the research that you did with the Rana Plaza incident was pretty deep, and there I also learned a lot of those things, and also did my own research on this topic, and the idea was to present it as it's for you to decide as the audience to see what's there and to make a conclusion whether what this is, and and especially with the clowns, it's really important that it is a non-judgmental approach for the clown to go through the emotional landscape of whatever it may be fully. And it's interesting that it comes across eventually in the end. Even when I see the finished piece, I do think that there's a very strong social critique, but that was in the beginning not at all the intention to go that way, but to start to explore it.
But I think as soon as you introduce the figure of the Buffon, that's it's a natural consequence.
Yeah. Yes.
That
and it was a decision. It was an artistic decision. That this really makes sense, because even in the beginning, when we are still clowns, you can see a glimpse of this buffoonery already.
Yeah.
Because they are going so crazy with wanting more and more and more. And clowning in itself is a very direct way of communication. It's a very direct way. Yeah, topic-wise and also with the audience. So.
Yeah.
And how because we have not just clowning and buffoonery, we have this linking parts. We have our musician Julia Lechner, and there are these linking performative parts, I would say. What would you say? What was your decision to make these links, and why are they important?
Yeah,
for this piece?
Actually, that's a good question, because it brings me back to another point that was really inspired by the work I did with Tomaz in Suddenly the Floor Was Not There, where the motivation behind my character, if I can call it that, my role was really in the form of a reporter, a person who reports what she has witnessed in the most in a very basic matter-of-factly way. And for me, the character of Julia, if I may call it that, or her role in this piece, is also a neutral figure who is not only connecting linking the different scenes, because the scenes are entirely standing on their own. They don't necessarily have directly to do with one another, but they are different episodes, different perspectives of the same situation. And she is not only connecting them, but she's also being the neutral spectator. She's offering that point of view of the piece to the audience, where they can eventually come to a conclusion for themselves with the data that they're gathering. And in that sense, she is a reporter of some sorts. You know, even though that's not what she's doing. She's not a journalist, she's not working with that, but she has this character of taking the information and connecting the missing links, that what the clowns, the characters of the clowns or what the bouffons are not seeing themselves, but from the outside you can see what's going on. So in that way, that was one of the motivations, of course. And the other one is also, I'm very interested, I mean, I'm not a clown director or a theater director, and I don't work necessarily with theater. I'm not educated in the Western theatrical studies of how a play is directed. But coming from where I come, which is a very strong classical Indian dance background, where dance is not considered as dance, but it's understood and recognized as dance theater, which means there is not only a storyline, but there's also music, there's rhythm, there's performativity, and there's a manifestation in the body, which is very actively including also the face and emotion, states of emotion. So coming from that point of view, working with you guys, but still from a choreographer's point of view, was essentially needing a part like Julia's that has a musical input. She brings a musical influence, but also developed very strongly from improvisation. And she still improvises in some parts of it, and some is totally set in her action. And that is for me what is bringing these things together. That's one of the ways for me, a strong link coming from my background, a musicality that kind of holds the whole space together so that the story can emerge, because it is a story in the end that we are trying to tell. So with this note, I would like to bring this talk to a conclusion, and we can continue discussing these different points of view. And I would like to say that on the 12th and the 13th of May, we have finally the performances of Mehr, eine, clownesk, groteske, Parabel, for live audience, which means it's not on screen. You can come to a theater, buy a ticket, and watch us perform this piece. And it will be at 7:30 in the evening in Toy House Theatre. And the tickets are already available online if you would like to come and watch. And you can see the snippets already now, probably as a part of this talk show. And we would invite you all to be there with us, well, all of you, or as many as you as possible, as many of you as possible. And we thank you for watching us share our insights and our artistic processes. And hopefully we will see each other again very soon.